Vin Diesel secretly walked into his own restaurant, stopping cold when he heard a server crying. Years ago, he had opened Torx, a high-end but welcoming restaurant in Los Angeles, California. It wasn't a vanity project or some side hustle to burn money. He had spent years perfecting the menu, hiring the right chefs, and ensuring his restaurant was a place where both everyday folks and Hollywood elites could enjoy a great meal. But Ving also knew that no business, no matter how successful, ran smoothly just because the numbers looked good on paper. The real truth of a place wasn't found in profit margins. It was found in the back kitchens, in break room whispers, in the exhausted sighs of employees after a long shift. That's why, every few months, Ving made a habit of walking into Torx as a regular customer. No flashy entrance, no announcement, just a man in a hoodie and jeans stepping into his own business. Like anyone else, that night the place was buzzing. The Friday dinner rush was in full swing, with servers darting between tables, balancing trays of sizzling steaks and cocktails. The scent of garlic butter and grilled ribeye filled the air, mingling with the faint tang of citrus from the bars. Signature drinks. The ambient lighting cast a golden glow over couples, friends, and solo diners enjoying their meals. Their laughter a soft hum beneath the clink of glasses and the murmur of conversation. At first glance, everything seemed fine-polished, even. But Vang had spent enough time in the industry to know that looks could be deceiving. He moved through the dining area, his steps casual, his eyes sharp, taking in every detail with the precision of someone who knew where to look for cracks. He spotted the manager, a tall, rigid-looking man in a navy blue dress shirt, standing at the edge of the floor, watching everything too closely, like a hawk circling its prey. There was something about his stance that felt off, not just observant, but controlling, his arms crossed, his jaw set, his gaze sweeping the room with an intensity that made the server's movements seem hurried, almost nervous. Vin's instincts prickled, a quiet warning he'd learned to trust over the years. He adjusted his hoodie, blending into the crowd, and made his way toward the bar, intending to sit and observe from a distance. But then, as he passed the side hallway near the kitchen, he heard a soft, muffled sound, barely noticeable over the din of the restaurant. He slowed his steps, his head turning slightly toward the break room door, which was slightly ajar. The sound became clearer. Someone was crying. Not loud, not dramatic. The kind of cry you let out when you're trying desperately not to break. Vin's footsteps faltered, his hand pausing on the edge of the bar counter. Something was very wrong, and he wasn't leaving until he found out what. Vin's gaze lingered on the break room door, the soft, muffled sound of crying pulling him closer despite the bustle of Torx around him. He took a step toward the hallway, his movements quiet, deliberate, the din of clinking glasses and murmured conversations fading into the background. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for him to catch a glimpse of a young woman inside, her head bowed, her fingers gripping the edge of a metal counter like she was trying to keep herself from collapsing. Another employee, a young man in a Torx uniform, stood beside her, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Vang didn't know her, but the look on her face, that raw, trembling fear hit him like a gut punch. Something was very, very wrong, and he wasn't leaving until he found out what. He turned back toward the bar, taking a seat on one of the stools, his face calm but his mind racing. The crying, it wasn't just stress. It was fear. Vang had worked in restaurants before. He knew what it was like to deal with rude customers, long shifts, aching feet. But this was different. His first instinct was to walk over and ask if she was okay. But right now, he wasn't Vin Diesel, the owner of Torx. He was just another customer, a stranger. So instead, he listened. The young man beside her, probably a fellow server, kept his voice low. Vang could only make out fragments. "You can't let him. He doesn't own you." The woman, Her voice, barely audible, responded, "What choice do I have? He made it clear. If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." Vin's grip tightened around the glass of water the bartender had set in front of him, the cool surface, grounding him as his thoughts churned. At first, he thought it might be about a customer. Maybe someone had harassed her. But the way she said it, the way her voice trembled with resignation, it wasn't about a customer. It was about someone inside the restaurant. Before he could think further, a bartender approached him, her movements quick, practiced. "Hey, what can I get you?" she asked, her tone polite but distracted. Vang turned, offering a small smile. "Just a water for now," he said, his voice even. She nodded and moved on, but Vang wasn't focused on drinks. He glanced toward the manager in the navy blue shirt, still standing near the floor, arms crossed, scanning the room with the kind of presence that made people nervous. The man's posture hadn't changed, but now Vang saw it for what it was: control, not leadership. The servers moved around him like they were walking on eggshells, their smiles forced, their glances fleeting. Then he noticed something else. The young man from the break room had stepped out, walking back onto the floor. His jaw was tight, his hands fidgeting as he adjusted the notepad in his apron. He looked rattled, his eyes darting toward the manager before dropping to the floor. Vin's gaze shifted to the bartender who had served him, her name tag reading Maya. She was wiping down the counter, her movements efficient, but her expression guarded, as if she'd seen too much and said too little. Vang knew an opening when he saw one. He leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice low. "Long night?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp, searching for the truth beneath the surface. Vin Diesel knew an opening when he saw one. The young man from the break room, Ethan Brooks, was still at the server station near the back of Torx, organizing plates with a tension in his movements that hadn't been there before. His jaw was tight, his hands fidgeting as he adjusted the notepad in his apron, his eyes darting toward the manager in the navy blue shirt before dropping to the floor. Vang stood up from the bar, his movements casual, and walked toward the station, the hum of the restaurant fading into a distant buzz as his focus narrowed. The scent of grilled ribeye lingered in the air, but it couldn't mask the unease that clung to Ethan like a shadow. "Hey, man," Vang said, keeping his voice low. "Got a pen?" Ethan looked up, startled, his grip on the stack of plates tightening. "Oh, yeah, sure," he said, grabbing one from the counter and handing it over, his fingers trembling slightly. Vang took it, but didn't walk away. He glanced at Ethan's name tag, then met his eyes, his tone even but probing. "Hey, Ethan, I couldn't help but notice your friend seems upset." Ethan stiffened, his gaze dropping to the plates, his hands busying themselves with a napkin that didn't need folding. "She's fine," he said, too quickly, his voice a strained whisper. Vang tilted his head slightly, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "She doesn't look fine." Ethan swallowed, his eyes darting toward the manager in the navy blue shirt, James Harper, who was still standing near the hostess station, watching the room like he owned it. The pause told Vang everything. Ethan was scared, not just for himself, but for the woman in the break room. After a long moment, Ethan exhaled sharply, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's not fine," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor, his fingers gripping the notepad at his waist. Vang studied his face, reading the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. The kid wanted to talk, he just wasn't sure if he could. Vang leaned on the counter slightly, keeping his posture relaxed, his voice just low enough to keep the conversation private. "How long has she been working here?" Ethan responded automatically. "A little over a year," then tensed, his eyes narrowing. "Why?" Vang shrugged, keeping his tone light. "Just wondering if she likes it here." Ethan let out a short, humorless chuckle, the sound bitter and hollow. "She doesn't," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "but she can't afford to leave." And there it was, the real problem. She wasn't just stressed, she was trapped. Vin's gut tightened, his instincts screaming that this wasn't just a bad work environment. Something deeper was going on here. Before he could ask anything else, Ethan stiffened, his gaze snapping to the side. Vang didn't need to turn around to know why the air shifted, thick with something unspoken. James Harper was walking toward them, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor, his navy blue shirt crisp and unyielding. "Everything okay over here?" James's voice was smooth but firm, his eyes narrowing as he stopped beside Ethan. The young server immediately dropped his gaze, busying himself with the plates in front of him. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice tight. "Just helping a customer." James didn't break eye contact with Vang, his smile polite but edged, a warning lurking beneath the surface. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his tone clipped. Vang smiled casually, his posture relaxed but his mind racing. "Just getting a pen," he said, holding it up. "Ethan here was kind enough to help me out." James's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good," he said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder a little too firmly, the gesture making the young man flinch. "Let's stay focused on work." Ethan nodded quickly, his eyes locked on the plates, his hands trembling slightly. Vang clenched his jaw but didn't react, not yet. He thanked Ethan and stepped away, feeling James's eyes on him the entire time. The manager's presence, a heavy weight that lingered even as Vang returned to the bar. He sat back down, his gaze drifting to the dining area, where Sofia Martinez was now serving a table, her movements mechanical, her voice steady, but her eyes hollow, as if she were holding herself together by sheer will. She glanced toward James, her posture stiffening for a fraction of a second before she forced a smile for the customer. Vin's grip on his glass tightened, his suspicion hardening into certainty. This wasn't just a tough boss. This was someone who thrived on control, and Sofia was at the center of it. He needed more information, and he knew exactly who to ask next. Chen, the bartender, was still wiping down the counter, her expression guarded but her eyes sharp, watching everything. Vang leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "Mind if I ask you something?" Vin Diesel pushed open the glass doors and walked back into Torx, the restaurant's dinner rush now winding down to a close. Fewer customers lingered at the tables, their laughter softer, their plates cleared, leaving the dining area quieter, the golden glow of the ambient lighting casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Fewer witnesses, Vang noted, his footsteps steady as he crossed the room. He didn't stop at the bar, didn't hesitate. His eyes locked on a Sofia Martinez, who was mid-conversation with a customer near the server station, her voice mechanical, her hands steady as she balanced a tray of empty glasses. But her eyes, those tired, hollow eyes, betrayed the fear she was trying so hard to hide. She saw Vang approaching and tensed slightly, like she expected trouble, her fingers tightening around the tray's edge. "Excuse me," Vang said, just loud enough for the customer to hear, his voice calm but firm. "I need to speak with you." For a moment, Sofia blinked, confusion flickering across her face. I'm with a customer, sir," she said, her tone polite but strained. The woman in front of her, a middle-aged diner with a half-empty glass of wine, frowned. "She's helping me right now," the customer said, her voice sharp. "You can wait." But Vang kept his eyes on Sofia, his gaze steady, unwavering. "It's important," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sofia swallowed, apologized to the customer with a forced smile, and stepped away from the counter, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her apron as she followed Vang a few steps away. James Harper noticed immediately. Vang saw him straighten from a spot near the service station, his navy blue shirt crisp against the dim light, his eyes narrowing as he crossed the floor with a predator's precision. He didn't like losing control, Vang could tell, and the way Sofia shrank slightly at the sight of him confirmed it. "Is there a problem here?" James asked, his voice polite but edged, his expression cool but his eyes sharp with irritation. Vang didn't turn to face him immediately, his focus still on Sofia, watching how her fingers clenched around the hem of her apron, how her breath hitched at the sound of James's voice. That reaction told Vang everything he needed to know. He turned, keeping his face neutral, his posture relaxed but his presence suddenly taking up more space. "Just having a conversation," he said, his voice even, but there was a weight to it that made James's smirk falter. "Well, Sofia has a job to do," James said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "She doesn't have time for private discussions." Vang caught the way Sofia flinched at the word private, her shoulders hunching as if bracing for a blow. That was all the confirmation he needed. His stance shifted, squaring his shoulders, his voice steady but laced with authority. "Actually," he said, "I think we should have a conversation. Right now." James's smirk faded completely, his eyes narrowing further, but before he could respond, Vang reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open, revealing his executive ownership credentials for Torx Restaurant Group. Sofia gasped, her tray slipping slightly in her hands, the glasses clinking softly. The servers nearby froze, their movements halting mid-step, their eyes wide. James's face drained of color, his mouth opening, then closing, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "My name is Vin Diesel," Vang said, his voice calm, but firm, "and you and I need to talk." The restaurant fell into a stunned silence, customers glancing over, sensing that something far bigger than a simple work dispute was unfolding. Servers exchanged wide-eyed looks, their whispers barely audible over the soft hum of the dining area. James blinked rapidly, his composure shattered, his hands twitching at his sides. "Sir, I didn't realize," he stammered, his voice faltering. "No, you didn't," Vang interrupted, his tone ice-cold. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" He turned slightly, his voice shifting from authority to something gentler as he addressed Sofia. "Stay here," he told her, his eyes softening. "This won't take long." Sofia barely nodded, her hands still trembling at her sides, her breath shallow as she watched Vang follow James toward the office at the back of the restaurant. The door closed behind them with a soft click, the sound echoing in the now quiet space. Inside, James tried to regain his composure, letting out a forced chuckle as he shook his head. "I have to say, sir, I didn't expect to see you here tonight," he said, his voice strained. "A bit unusual for the owner to visit unannounced." Vang leaned forward, planting both hands on the desk, his presence filling the small room. "You know what else is unusual?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "A restaurant manager abusing his power to intimidate his employees." James flinched, his face paling further. "Sir, I don't know what you mean," he tried, his voice trembling. "If there have been any misunderstandings," Vang cut him off, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his phone. With a single tap, he played back a recording, Ethan's voice coming through the speaker, hushed and urgent. "You can't let him. He doesn't own you." Then Sofia's, raw and shaken. "If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." James's eyes widened, the color draining from his face completely, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the desk. "You should have known better," Vang said, his voice even colder now. "You've been playing this game for a long time, haven't you? Preying on employees who need their jobs the most, making them feel trapped. But let me be very clear, you just ran out of time." Vang dialed a number on his phone, his movements deliberate, his gaze never leaving James. "You're done," he said simply, his voice a quiet promise. "You will never work in this industry again." James sat there, frozen, his power stripped away in an instant, his eyes darting toward the door as if searching for an escape that no longer existed. Vang stepped back, his expression unyielding, and opened the office door, leaving James to face the consequences of his actions. He walked back into the dining area, his steps steady, his focus shifting to Sofia, who stood where he'd left her. Her hands still trembling, but her posture slightly straighter, as if a weight had begun to lift. "You're safe now," Vang said softly, his voice gentle but firm. Sofia stared at him, her lips parting slightly, a shaky breath escaping as disbelief and relief washed over her. For the first time that night, her shoulders relaxed, her hands unclenching from her apron, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she processed the words. She let out a slow exhale, the sound barely audible, but it carried the weight of a year's worth of fear finally beginning to fade. The dining area of Torx was quieter now, the last of the Friday night customers trickling out into the Los Angeles night, their laughter fading as the glass doors swung shut behind them. The golden glow of the ambient lighting cast a softer hue over the empty tables, the scent of garlic butter and grilled ribeye lingering in the air like a memory of the rush that had filled the space hours ago. But the tension that had gripped the restaurant all evening hadn't dissipated. It had shifted, replaced by a cautious stillness as the staff gathered near the service station, their eyes wide, their whispers barely audible. Sofia Martinez stood among them, her hands no longer trembling but her posture still guarded, as if she couldn't quite believe the storm had passed. Ethan Brooks and Maya Chen flanked her, their expressions a mix of disbelief and relief, while other servers hovered nearby, their aprons untied, their shifts forgotten in the wake of what had just happened. Vin Diesel stepped out of the office, his presence commanding but calm, his hoodie still pulled low over his brow as he crossed the floor. The staff turned to him as one, their gazes a mixture of awe and uncertainty, waiting for what came next. He stopped in front of them, his sharp eyes scanning the group, taking in every face, every flicker of emotion. "He's gone," he said softly, his voice steady but gentle, directed at Sofia. "You're safe." Sofia's lips parted slightly, a shaky breath escaping as she processed the words, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that night. Ethan let out a slow exhale, his hands unclenching from the notepad he'd been gripping, while Maya's guarded expression softened, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Vang raised his voice slightly, addressing the entire team, his tone firm, but warm. "You've all been working under someone who didn't deserve his position," he said, his words carrying the weight of a promise. "That changes now. This restaurant is under direct review, not just replacing James, but making sure no one else like him gets this kind of power again." The room was quiet, the weight of his words settling over the staff like a blanket, heavy but comforting. Servers exchanged glances, some nodding slowly, others still processing the shift in their reality. Sofia wiped at her eyes, swallowing hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want anyone else to go through this," she sighed, her words trembling but resolute. "Not here, not anywhere." Vang nodded, his gaze softening as he met her eyes, a small, reassuring smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "And they won't," he said, his voice a quiet vow. But before he could say more, another voice cut through the stillness, strong and steady. "We need more than promises," said Lydia Grant, a senior server who had been with Torx since its opening, her arms crossed but her expression determined. She stepped forward, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes sharp with the kind of clarity that came from years of watching, waiting, enduring. "We need a system, a way to speak up without fear. Because this isn't just about James. It's about how things work here, how we're treated, how we're afraid to say anything." Ethan nodded, his voice stronger now, emboldened by Lydia's words. She's right, he said, his gaze flickering to Veng. It's not just one bad manager. The pressure, the way we're treated, the fear of speaking up, it's bigger than just this restaurant. Maya chimed in, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. A lot of us feel like we have no choice but to put up with it, she said. The second we complain, we're out of a job. Sofia looked down, guilt flickering across her face, her voice barely audible. I wanted to leave so many times, she admitted, but I couldn't afford to. I thought maybe this was normal. Vin's jaw tightened, his hands clenching briefly at his sides. This was why he went undercover, why he walked into his own businesses unannounced. Not because of numbers, not because of performance reviews, but because the real problems were the ones hidden beneath the surface, the ones that reports couldn't show. He took a slow breath, his voice steady but filled with resolve. That stops today, he said, his words cutting through the quiet like a blade. I don't just want to fix this restaurant, I want to fix the system, and I'll need your help to do that. That means transparency. That means trust. That means if something is wrong, you speak up. Sofia studied him for a long moment, her hazel eyes searching his face, as if looking for a reason to believe him. And if we do, she asked, her voice trembling, will anyone actually listen? Veng met her gaze, his expression unyielding but kind. I will, he said, his voice a quiet promise. Sofia nodded slowly, a flicker of hope lighting her tired eyes, and for the first time that night, she looked like she believed it. Lydia stepped closer, her arms uncrossing, her voice softer now. Then, let's start with a reporting system, she said. Something anonymous, something safe. Veng nodded, his mind already racing with plans. Done, he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of a commitment. He turned to Sofia, his tone gentler now. What happens next is up to you, he said. She took a shaky breath, her hands steadying as she looked at Ethan and Maya, who gave her small, encouraging nods. I just want to feel safe again, she said softly, her voice breaking but resolute. Vin's gaze softened, a quiet understanding passing between them. You will, he said, his words a vow that echoed through the now silent restaurant, a promise of a new beginning for Torx and everyone who called it their livelihood. 1 month later, Torx thrived under a new dawn, the Los Angeles sun casting a warm glow through the restaurant's tall windows, the scent of fresh herbs and sizzling steaks once again filling the air. The dining area buzzed with the early evening crowd, but the atmosphere had shifted lighter, freer, the laughter of customers mingling with the genuine smiles of the staff. Sofia Martinez moved through the tables with a newfound confidence, her apron tied neatly around her waist, her hazel eyes bright with a hope that had been absent for so long. Now a shift leader, she paused to chat with Ethan Brooks and Maya Chen, their laughter a soft melody as they shared a quiet joke. Their shoulders relaxed, their faces unburdened by the fear that had once defined their days. Vin Diesel watched from a distance, parked across the street in his car, his hoodie pulled low as he observed the scene through the window. The changes he'd promised had taken root. A new manager, a transparent reporting system, and a culture where speaking up was encouraged, not feared. Sofia's smile, the way she carried herself with quiet strength, was proof of that. She had shared her story with him that night, her voice trembling as she admitted she'd stayed for her son's sake, afraid to lose the job that kept them afloat. Veng had listened, his heart heavy but resolute, ensuring she felt heard, offering her the support she needed to heal. Now, seeing her thrive, he knew it had been worth it, but as he watched, his thoughts drifted beyond Torx. How many more Sofias were out there, trapped in workplaces where power was abused, where fear silenced voices that deserved to be heard? He exhaled, running a hand over his face, the weight of that question settling over him. Being a leader wasn't just about profit margins or efficiency. It was about people, about responsibility. He vowed to overhaul his other businesses to ensure no employee ever felt trapped again, to be the kind of leader who listened, who acted. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. And Vang started his car, a quiet resolve in his chest. If you see someone struggling, don't stay silent, he thought. The word's a mantra for the road ahead. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to break the cycle.